So I have all these ideas for episodes on my mind. I thought about brewing up another Moon Hoax episode, which I think I will. Not quite ready for all the angles and factoids I want to share. And I think that one that's starting to dawn on me that I think I need to go through, which will be sort of an extension of the gravity episode. And this is not going to catch people's minds right away, but those of you who've searched on YouTube and you found this episode, or you searched on Google or whatever, I think you'll be pleased with where we're going here. I'm calling this Aethereal Winds in my brain. Maybe I change the name before it comes out. But it dawned on me the other day when I was thinking about time travel. And it has to do with the Twilight Zone episode with Burgess Meredith, where he is at a... actually, I have to say, take that back. He's in a different episode. There's another gentleman where he is sort of a bit of a loudmouth. He talks a lot. He's sort of an annoying nerd guy, brilliantly played by this actor. I'll find out what episode name it is. And he ends up kind of losing his job, losing his friends, and he ends up at a bar talking to a foreign guy, and with his pretty much his last money, he buys this guy a beer. And the guy's touched, and he says, "Okay, I want to give you a gift for buying me this beer." And he gives him a stopwatch. And he's like, "Oh, why do you have a stopwatch? What are you timing?" Because, you know, back in those days, they only did one thing. They just started and stopped, and you could take a look. So someone would have to have a special job, obviously. He says, "Well, you know, you'll see. It's a special stopwatch." Okay, great. Guy leaves. He's kind of drunk. The guy that gave him the stopwatch, the dude who gets the stopwatch, starts messing around and hits it. And as soon as he hits stop, I guess it's the stop or the start, I'm not sure, but the guy owns a place freezes. And time stops. And then he can do things around the room, and then hit it again, and it starts again. And anyone else but him, they don't see it. They're actually paused in time. But he can accomplish a bunch of things in that time frame. And that got me thinking. Now, if you've watched every single episode, which only a few of you have, you'll know I'm a big proponent of Aethereal Winds, because once I had it explained to me, gravity was immediately explained, which is something I've struggled with my entire lifetime. I mean, I've spent 15 years trying to find a unified theory to the universe, bouncing it off of amazing minds, but it never made sense. I came up with an idea, and it kind of works in a frequency-based universe, but it just was missing this underlying thing. Physics always welcomes you to the club of completely fucking confused and don't know anything, right? And the reason why is that that's their job. The founding members of physics were chartered to mess up your mind and close it and keep you lost by the bankers that funded the physicists. I mean, think about it. They sit around and just do nothing, right? I wrote an equation on a board. Here's $1 million. In the name of academia, of accomplishing nothing. That's what I love about it. Oh, but CERN is proof that all of this was worthwhile. Okay. Once you learn about ether, it's mind-blowing. Yes, there are bullshit experiments, the Michelson experiment that supposedly proved that ether doesn't exist. Go research that one, okay? Just look up the fraud of the Michelson experiment, and you will see there's a couple beautiful YouTube videos out there of a guy that really broke down the setup of the experiment and then the fudged results. And it's an experiment that completely misunderstands every single thing about ether and then creates an experiment around it. You know, it'd be like someone trying to become a plumber, you know, controlling water, right? That's what plumbers do. They have a source, they have a way to route it, they have all kinds of utilities that can be attached to a pipe, a faucet, a shower, whatever, a tank. Except this particular group of plumbers who created the Michelson experiment were trying to use sand instead of pipes. And if that sounds insane, then now you know what the Michelson experiment's all about. They thought they could control the flow of ethereal particles. They thought that they had they built these tubes that were supposed to absorb ethereal particles, and it's just insane. They didn't understand that ethereal particles and ethereal winds go through all things that we've been able to find. The only thing that can repel in a dielectric manner ethereal winds is ether. Right? That's where dielectric energy comes from. It's where dielectric repulsion from magnets. You know, like a living object. If you put a magnet against it, it will. The waves coming off the magnet will bounce off of organic flesh because it is a chaotic chaotic collection of winds that make up all the atoms that make up organic life. The reason why you can take, you know, a magnet up to something that's magnetic and it automatically goes bam and slams together is because it's a unified crystalline structure, which makes it a metal. Okay, we're gonna just go all over the place with this theory, so you can kind of see, hopefully through many examples, what the hell I'm talking about. I used to fix VCRs when I was a kid. My father taught me. He was always building electronic Heath kits, you know, televisions and amplifiers and all kinds of wild stuff. So I got to learn electronics at a very early age. By the age of 17, I had enrolled in a robotics course through the mail, which taught me the rest of electronics. I just bought a robot kit today. It was on sale. But there's an analogy inside a VCR that will make sense to what I'm going to talk about today, which is pausing time. Haven't you guys once ever thought about what it would be like to pause time? You watch that Twilight Zone episode and you're like, man, that'd be cool. I could pause time and smooch a girl, steal some money, drive a car real fast. But how would you do that? How would you take everything and hold it in position? Well, when you used to run an old VCR with tapes, VHS, beta tapes, doesn't matter, there's this drum in there that spins. And electronics companies love moving parts because moving parts break, right? When the digital, you know, RAM sticks came out, they hated them because, well, they didn't break, right? So they mess with the batteries, right? The batteries are always the thing that they fuck up on you. Okay. That's the renewal mechanism. That's the obsolete mechanism. But when you pause the tape, what ended up happening was the tape stops advancing through the cassette from one reel to the other reel. And now it's sitting against the head. The head is rotating. And the head have these little tiny dashes in it, which is where the actual data readers come in. And you used to always hear this stuff. For those of you who are my age or older, you're going to laugh your head off. But it got to the point where we started out with a single head, then a double head, then a triple head. And this kept getting to the point where we went all the way up to a 7-head VCR, meaning on this little drum, a little polished chrome drum, about 3 inches and about 2.5 inches in diameter. The more heads you put on this drum, when you hit pause, the picture was super clear because it was able to read a bunch of data in a really short period of time. But it was holding that tape in place, but the head of reality kept going because the head is what's creating the picture on the screen. It also ate the shit out of your tape. So if you pause too long, it's knocking the emulsion off your tape, and so it starts eating up your movie right there. So don't do that if you still have a VCR. But the interesting thing is that even though it was paused, sort of an advancement of time, right? Time is on this linear piece of tape. It goes from one reel to the other. The head still has to move in order for you to see something. The reason why I mention this analogy is that in order to pause time, you must pause ethereal winds. The very bloodline that keeps everything going, right? Now imagine you have a see-through pipe. Some of you may have experienced this in your lifetime. And There's water going by. Boom, inside this pipe. You can see it. Sometimes industrial pipes will actually have a perforated glass or plexiglass opening so that you can see what's in there. Well, now, what happens if you want to pause the water? I mean, you're going to block this off here and block that off there. You're not going to supply any more water. You're going to cut off the supply. The water's still doing this jostling thing inside the pipe, right? If there's any play at all. You don't see it just freeze. You know, the particle's just there. That's your problem with ethereal winds and time travel in general. And I'm just starting with a time travel idea just to kind of get you guys warmed up here. What you have to understand is that all of everything, not just life, quote-unquote organic life, but everything in the entire universe is comprised of, in this reality, if you're watching me on YouTube, this 5 sense, 3-dimensional reality of which we also create a bullshit T, which is time, because we have memory, everything is being constantly generated out of this stuff. Everything. Every single atom in the universe is nothing more than a current, a certain rotational current of its behavior at a certain speed, velocity, and diameter. Why diameter? Well, let me ask you this. If I showed you a rain drain in your sink in your kitchen, sorry, not rain drain, a drain in your kitchen. We fill up the sink and we pull out the plug and it starts to spiral. You're going to get probably about a 4-inch diameter, and it's going to get smaller and smaller as what? As the water volumes reduces, the diameter of that spiral, that current, is going to shrink. At the very last second, it gets paper thin and goes away. How many of you have seen industrial drains that are part of dams? And so you've got the still water, it's part of a lake, and all of a sudden they open that chamber up and the lake goes woof down inside this hole and things start spinning in a vortex, right? You see, the rotation just begins. It's just like a natural thing. As it is above, so too it is below. So too it is really below, okay? The way that water behaves is right in front of your face how ether behaves. All right? In the interview with Bart Sabrell, I keep saying his name wrong, he made a great point about how gravity works, and he says, look, we see bubbles in water. All right, now he mentioned dark matter, which I don't think exists, or you can classify anything unseen as dark matter, but whatever, he's correct. Water pushes on air in a unified manner. You see it all the time, right? For you flat earthers, you need to get up to date on this. It encapsulates water in a bubble. As it is below, so too it is above. We got to reverse the analogy every once in a while. Okay. Well, isn't it awesome that water is really the way you understand electricity? When you go to electronic school and they're trying to teach you how all the components work, a resistor, a coil, a diode, a transistor, you have to just learn in your brain how water flows in pipes. And you need to understand that all of these mechanisms are merely mechanisms of water control. A silicone chip. Well, the electrons don't move inside pipes, okay, but they move on conductive surfaces, surfaces that are able to rotate their outer valence of electrons. So again, when you want to send electricity, for those who you haven't gotten into it, from one side of the room to the other side of the room, okay, one of the ways to think about it is the chainsaw blade. I've talked about this recently. If you put a little bit of fingernail polish on a little tooth right here in front of your chest, right, and your buddy's on the other side, and you okay, turn it on, boop, and the chain goes all the way down to your buddy, and that red dot gets down to your friend, that's when the electron right in front of you actually made it to the other side. But you don't actually need to wait for that little red one to get all the way down to the other side of the room before it's going to start cutting wood on the other side, right? As the blade turns, it's creating this reaction, which is what we call a conductive reaction, right? The only thing electronic components are components that use the valence of electricity, the conductive nature of electricity, this chainsaw reaction, and it creates sort of two-dimensional pipes. on how to control the electricity. A diode only allows electricity to move one way. Why was that necessary? Because Tesla came in with alternating current. If you let current on a alternating circuit run, what happens with the chainsaw blade is that nail polish will go halfway down the chainsaw and then come back to you, and go halfway down and go back to you, and it just oscillates back and forth. So you put a diode in there, the chainsaw blade goes halfway. While the current is sucking backwards, nothing's happening. But as it pushes forward again, it pushes that thing to the other side of the room in the next positive sine wave, right? Now, for those of you who are like, Jesus, man, I don't really like your episode, a little too nerdy. Here's why it's important, in my opinion. Let's say you're a hippie and you like it. You got crystals in your house. You feel spirit energy. You can see auras. You can just hug a person and you are sensitive enough to feel it. The massive emotional, spiritual difference of a hug. All of that is being created, or I should say, mediated by ether. Now, there's a lot of us that believe that there's a spiritual energy that runs on top of this. That it's like that game in the 70s. I don't even know, probably way back 100 years ago. But it's the one that was really famous when I was a kid. You have some of you guys still have these in your house. It's a square box. It has a bunch of holes on it. And there is like a ball bearing, like a half-inch ball bearing. The box has these adjustable little knobs on it, and it tilts the world that the ball bearing's on, up, back, left, and right. And the goal of the game is to trick the ball to go from one side of the maze that's in this thing to the other side. But if you go down the wrong way, it's going to drop to a hole, and you got to restart the game again, right? And the analogy of the spirit related to Aethereal Winds, your spirit is the ball. It's this uniquely identifying energy that is you. It is your consciousness. It's what you are listening to me right now. The world that is shaking, turning, and twisting, well, that's the ethereal realization. If you just had the ball floating in space, what are you? You're just sitting in space doing nothing. The second you put it into an environment, you have a paradigm. Well, now a ball makes more sense to me. It's a thing that rolls around in a pinball machine. But without the pinball machine, this clump of metal that's polished, it's neat looking, but it has no purpose. It has no purpose unless it's given a paradigm of existence, right? What's a ball bearing when it's inside a packed wheel assembly? It's a ball bearing that keeps the tires spinning beautifully, right? Was it your CV boot or whatever it is? Ball bearings are useful for all kinds of things. Imagine that the pinball ball that we have seen in pinball machines our whole life was actually ripped off from some other piece of industrial equipment. And for 80 years prior to the invention of a pinball machine, pinballs or balls that big were used in, I don't know, some crazy motor that Edison invented or something. And so everyone knew them as ball bearings that were in gigantic engines. And someone goes, what are you doing with that ball? Oh, I made this thing, it's got flippers in it and bumpers and boom, boom, boom. I know you get me, but it's interesting to think about the shifts in the brain. Anytime man has an epiphany in history, it is important for us to crawl into their minds prior to the epiphany and try to relive the epiphany, because it will yield our own epiphanies, which might be taking it to the next level. I'll give you another example of epiphanies that are actually very useful to recreate. I'm a screenwriter, okay? All right. I bumped into a new friend named Steve, brilliant guy, and we're talking about our scripts together. And he shared some brilliant stuff that he was working on, and I shared my best stuff. And each one of us, at the end, we let ourselves, finish. But at the end, each one of us said, you know what I thought you were going to do? I thought you were going to go this way instead of that way. there's nothing more valuable in the world as a writer than having that moment with someone else, and you're like, oh my God, it's either going to go one way or the other. It usually is, I thought about that, but then this breaks and that breaks. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's cool. I like your choice even more now. Or sometimes the guy or girl, whoever you're talking to, gives you this other idea, and then you're like, wow, that's ingenious. I might just change my script. I've done it to people, and people have done it to me. Kyle, my old host, did that to me a bunch of times. He's a brilliant writer, by the way. He never mentions it, but he's like, the dude can smith a sentence that you read, and, it's the first time Francis Bacon lay down and took a nap, But now, what are we taught when we're little kids about the universe? If you study biology or physics or any type of constructional sciences, right? What we're all made out of. Well, they tell you the center of the world's got nickel iron, Saturn's full of fart clouds, and Tootsie Roll's made out of sugar, right? Your body has blood, and it's got red blood cells and white blood cells. Everything is all divided up into different pieces and parts, and I'm not saying that there's any problem understanding the higher constructs of what everything is called. Of course, we need to know these things so we know how to live our lives. But the one blind spot that we are all bred into is the lack of ethereal particles. If you were told as a child, and there is a bit of this in physics, which is a fucking joke, because of course we're all built out of a unified particle. The latest incarnation is the Higgs boson particle, which, all I can say is bullshit. Okay. That particle is like an atomic particle created by a committee of people with butthurt snowflake minds. Well, my theory gets in there too. Okay, we'll put your theory on it. Well, it's getting to be a big particle now, Joey. Ugh, just fucking painful, man. Painful. Shit, maybe it even exists, but damn. These people have tried to create reality on a piece of paper, and it's like CERN Hadron Collider. I mean, you're talking about if the outside charter, I would say 95% of the charter of that object, that machine, the biggest machine man has ever made, that we're aware of, if that thing is real, the whole thing is full of a bunch of old, stale science. And you're only invited into the program if you have old, stale science. Man, you could be 19 years old, super genius, but you're going to have to refrain from mentioning anything that has to do with electrical universe, with ethereal winds, with the rediscovering of what this world's made out of. So it just pumps indoctrination into their veins. I'm not convinced they really believe any of the outward crap, but they did give, was it the Higgs guy or whatever, some award saying they found the God particle, and go see my CERN episode for that. I've been pissing and moaning about that for the last month or so. When you peel it all back to a single particle that has a single behavior of moving in 3D space, doesn't matter if it's a Cartesian coordinate system, a flat 2D plane, and some memory somewhere in a computer that's being used as our simulation, or three-dimensional memory in some super quantum system somewhere in some other dimension, and we're just the byproduct of it. Fine, I don't really care how this is actually occurring personally, because it's occurring. The Egyptians said they healed people through frequency. They laid you down on an altar, had a conversation with you. Well, how bad do you feel? And again, they didn't have cell phone cancer and aspartame rotting minds and vaccinations causing autistic brain damaged children. They didn't have any of that crap because they weren't stupid. They lived off the land in perfect harmony with the earth. But they laid you on an altar, and using the big electrical plant called the pyramids and the huge catacomb of water underneath, and a big conductive rod that went down into that water that's on top of a aqua ravine, providing more natural electricity up. Same thing as Tesla constructed in Colorado Springs some several thousand years later. They resonated your body. They resonated your body with a frequency that cannot atomically hurt your native biology. But all of the weak invaders, the bacteria, the viruses, they get shattered. All you got to do is take a crap and it's all gone. We have seen how zero-point energy systems are created all the time on the internet. We've seen it. I saw a funny little zero-point energy system where someone took a coiled copper wire, the same diameter of his AA battery, and this girl puts it in one end with a certain polarity, and it starts to fly around the inside of this coil all by itself, and then she connected them together, and it just kept going. There you go, right? Oh yeah, it'll probably diminish over time as the battery loses its charge, but Jesus, I'll take that over paying my electric bill any day of the month, right? They assassinate people who build zero-point energy systems like Stan Myers. Again, I sat for most of the year of 2003 in Laguna, here in California, Southern California, across the table from a guy who sold his company for nearly $500 million, a VC company, and I mentioned about what is this deal about people creating these zero-point energy systems. He says, oh yeah, what we do is we kill them. I said, what? He goes, yeah, you know, usually they're in the Midwest, some guy who's figured it out. He goes, there's only a few machines that can do it. We know them all. And then, of course, they need money to get their idea manufactured. We invite them in, and on the trip, either to and from, and we encourage them to use their energy system to get here. If they can create a car or something. And he goes, we just accident them. I think he gave me a number of at least 7 people in his lifetime that he knew did that. And the funny thing is the VC company gets a little silent kickback, a little loan or something to keep these guys from ever getting money to see their idea through. We know Tesla's big tower got knocked down. 1927, he spent 10 years building this thing. And they made him knock it down because it was going to give free power to everyone. Transmit it directly into your house without hurting anything in between. I'm not completely convinced that Tesla really understood the damage to mitochondria and the subatomic biological particles of our body and electricity. He didn't have any expertise that I know of in those areas. So you keep hearing things that Tesla's whole thing was safe. He might have been full of shit, but the guy did live to be quite old, and he exposed himself to a tremendous amount of electricity. So hopefully he was right. But they made him tear it down because it was going to get in the way of selling energy. Anything that competes with oil, it's marginalized, people are killed, and hopefully, according to the oil companies, hopefully before you ever discover it ever existed. That way they don't have to explain themselves. There's no mess. You don't even know about the mess. It was cleaned up a long time ago. But that's a higher idea, right? That's fracturing tap water to be hydrogen, you know, to pop the hydrogen out of tap water. That's Stan Myers' engine, murdered in 1998, drinking a small glass of cranberry juice in front of his family after being offered $1.1 billion for invention, and he turned it down because he thought angels were protecting him. He feared nothing. The total deletion of ethereal winds and ethereal particles out of our scientific books of subatomic physics has made us stupid every single day. And because it contributes to all things, biological and mineral, you know, it retards our brains away from understanding the beautiful nature that we have, our relationship that we have with things like the sun. What if I told you that the rays of the sun will exacerbate the thoughts you have in your mind? Because your mind is an electrical object. It uses bioelectric matter, neurons, nervous system construction throughout your system. All of your heart runs on electricity, right? People who have congenital heart problems often have a problem if they don't have a deformity in their heart, but usually even deformities in a congenital heart problem are related to the nature of conductivity in the muscle tissue. So when you're a little fetus inside your mother, the electrical stimulation in one of your valves isn't correct. The DNA didn't form properly. Perhaps there's a Down syndrome gene in there, and so it's constructing the wrong circuits, and so things aren't performing correctly. My grandfather had a congenital heart issue, which I do not have. But his was an electrical one. He had a weak valve. But he lived to be 60 years old. That's not bad. He's supposed to die at 12. I don't know where the hell they come up with these numbers. So here's the sun, pounding you. When I'm out here, see these little rays that go across my face? I guarantee you those rays are penetrating my skull. My pituitary gland is creating vitamin D. Vitamin D is paramount to health. People who are outside, running on the beach, running, jogging, they think it's because they're jogging, and they're partially correct. The cardiovascular system, once you use your body, you don't lose your body, but at the same exact time, they're being imbued with the power to be whatever they want to be on a mental level. Obviously, you need to challenge yourself, otherwise you will have very low neural counts in your brain. The more you think, the more you overstimulate the electricity in your brain, and the more it spawns new brain cells, as I just said in a recent episode, which I don't know if I will have aired before this one. Now, my gravity episode, I went through all this about how ethereal winds actually turn into electricity, for instance. Things that ricochet off of themselves is the dielectric wave. So if you had a steel ball and you shoot a bullet at it, if you hit it directly on and the bullet doesn't lose its form and the ball doesn't lose its form, you know it's coming right back at your face. It'll go right back in the barrel of the gun if it's perfect. Most of the time it reflects off in a different trajectory. Okay. But we also know orbiting happens. We see it in water all the time, right? Now there's some drains that I was talking about, the water and the dam. Sometimes you'll see the drain when it first gets popped and it first gets opened. The water's flowing directly down the hole. That's a dielectric path straight into the hole. Of course, it's not reflecting out, so it's not really dielectric, but it's in that straight perpendicular path to the opening of the hole. But let to go for a few seconds, it'll start doing the rotation thing, because there's outside forces in the pool of water that are trying to go in random directions. Now, water isn't a pure, perfect example of ether, because it will have a lot of currents that are going in a bunch of different directions. But I think that's the way that ethereal winds have organized themselves, which is what we call gravity waves. But we see orbiting happen all the time. The moon orbits the Earth. It does. There's planets orbiting, or moons orbiting planets. Again, the weird thing about flat Earth for me is that you can take a telescope, point it at Jupiter, point it at Mars, much closer, and you can see celestial bodies going around those bodies. You can see them. You can't see them in super detail, but you can see how they go around these other objects. So the idea that that's happening out there, but it's not happening to us, and we have a moon, I'm not saying the moon is what we think it is. Okay, I don't believe in craters at all. I don't think I believe in meteorites worth a damn. Meteorites I've always seen, photographed as supposedly hitting human beings in cars. They're not creating perfectly round craters anywhere. Doesn't make any sense, right? When the particle that's bouncing back from center, which is the dielectric wave, bounces into the orbital wave, you get electromagnetism. Okay? A very specific behavior that we can utilize for energy. So all we have to do is start to teach ethereal winds to college students, to grade schoolers, and see what they come up with, because we're not teaching it. When my daughter was young, she was 9 years old, we invented this ritual when I got her this whiteboard in her bedroom. One of the ways I got her to sleep was to say it was class time. And she'd run in that room and jump down. There was just two things that happened. I would explain something I wanted to explain to her, and then I would allow her to ask me any question about anything in the whole world, and I'd write it on the board and explain it to her. Thank God she was good with her questions. But I regret that the first time that I taught her, the first thing I ever taught her was gravity, and I was using the old crappy model of mass pulling against mass, which made no goddamn sense. Had I taught my daughter ethereal winds, she would have schooled the shit out of her teachers. And she got a degree in chemistry, so she's not an idiot. Thank God. She loves science. Go figure. But back to the stopping time analogy, just to visit that and finish it up real quick. The idea is you can't stop time because then you'd have to stop all the ether, and the ether is never going to stop. So this illusion of change that creates this illusion of time and memory that makes us remember the previous state. What a beautiful, amazing thing that is, right? Memory. What a crazy idea that we have memory. All there is the now. That's it, man. Now, there's this rumor that Tesla wrote in a paper that he created a time machine. It's part of the really funny Donald Trump as a Syria bombing time traveler, right? What Tesla described, if you read it very carefully, was that he had surrounded himself in a cloud of electricity. And that gazing outside in his 5-point sense system, gazing outside of the room, he said that time looked very distorted. Okay. What I didn't hear him say was that his assistant was moving at, a rapid pace or a slow pace. I didn't hear him say a dinosaur walked by all of a sudden. I didn't hear him say that he saw spaceships all of a sudden. I didn't hear him say anything that indicated time would change. But I think we could probably theorize why he might be able to see his assistant move slow or assistant move fast. Because ethereal particles are a part of all metabolism of all things, right? I'm looking at a pottery bowl that I turned upside down so that my previous gardener wouldn't weed back a little plant I've been trying to grow. The new guy's awesome, by the way. But if the particles or the currents that make up of ether that make up that bowl were to just decide to disperse, that bowl would cease to exist. Immediately, it'd be recycled into something else. Go free. When you burn something up, you're doing exactly that. You're thermalizing it. You're exciting it with the reaction of fire, the verbal reaction of fire, which is why you see photons and fire. And what's it do? It takes everything that can be combusted and releases it into the universe as fast-moving ether, which is what we call heat. Okay? And it escapes. It goes up. What's left? Well, the carbon that won't burn. Okay, carbon is a fundamental ethereal wind current of the universe. It takes a hell of a lot more energy to destroy carbon than we have ever found. Okay? Might be interesting to do the math on what would happen if you could shatter a carbon atom. The carbon bomb. But now, if we can acknowledge for a second that there's this wind that's everywhere, it is the fundamental thing that keeps everything together. It is the tiniest little Lego you could possibly build anything out of. And the way it moves in the universe is the way it creates things. Now, please don't think I'm going after the evolutional model or creation model. Adapt your belief in the first theory of what controls all this and apply it. If you're an evolutionist, then this is all random, something from nothing. If you're a creationist, then you believe that there's a consciousness that is perhaps even made out of this, he or him or herself, and they hold this all together. It's really irrelevant at this stage of the conversation. But this stuff goes through everything, which is why the Michelson experiment of saying we're controlling ethereal sensing, okay, by building pipes, right? If pipes were capable of controlling ether, then the zero gravity system of the world would be put a bunch of pipes over you, and then ether couldn't go through pipes, and then all of a sudden you'd be weightless underneath the ether, underneath the pipes, right? It just makes no sense at all. But back on subject of like spirituality, why do we have intuition? Why do we seem to be able to read certain people's minds? You know, you get with a boyfriend and girlfriend, you get so close to each other you can finish each other's sentences. My daughter, I swear to God, she would be in the back seat of my car. This has happened at least, 3 or 4 super profound times, and she's in the back seat reading my mind. And I'm thinking about something so esoteric. My child is so young, she hasn't had these experiences yet, and she will say what I was thinking. Now, why would I be having a stronger connection to my kid than, say, someone right next to me who's new? You get in my car. I don't know you. Get in my car. Why is it that the more you talk to a human being, if you're going to be compatible with them, you get more compatible with them? The next time you see them, you have this weird feeling like, you know, a really good friend is one of those people you met yesterday, but man, it feels like you've known them your whole life. What's creating that feeling? It's absolutely irrational. And I can tell you that I've had that feeling with people who have a past that's very compatible with mine. You know, I meet someone in California like, oh, I was raised in Kansas too. Where are you raised? Oh, we find out we're raised 5 miles from each other. No shit. Yeah, you ever go to that place? Oh yeah, it's great. Tasty Freeze was so good there. And talk about the ice place in there. I've known someone like that and didn't feel the huge connection. It was nostalgic and cool. I definitely liked talking to them. But then there's someone who's raised in California, Southern California, never really left the county, and there's just this connection with them. They think like I think, you know, or at least they spiritually evaluate things similar, right? There's experiments where you put two people's foreheads together for 25 minutes, and for the next 5 minutes they're sharing thoughts when you pull them apart. Just like the pinball machine carrying the pinball. The universe is the machine and you are the pinball. Information is being carried on top of this other wave. Now, what will happen to you is that this is a brand new concept for you. And I mean utterly brand new. It'll take you a while. It'll take you a while unless you're just totally falling into this like a natural talent, which could happen too. But it'll take you a while to look everywhere that you exist, in your bedroom, and when you're by yourself, in the shower, and when you're driving down the street. When you hear about things, you'll see scientific experiments if you pay attention. And it'll suddenly explain everything. And I'll give you an example that I've sort of already mentioned. But there was a video online. Well, there's this phenomenon going on in April of 2018 where people are taking gigantic balls of tinfoil, pounding them with hammers and sledgehammers and stuff, and they eventually get it pounded down to a beautiful shiny ball. They sand it with high grade, 1000 grit sandpaper, and it just turns into like a sphere, like a big rollerball ball. But this guy, I watched the next video, and what he had done is he bought a 1,000-pound magnet. It was a brick about 5 inches by 3 inches by 3 inches, and what it meant was if he were to attach that to like a lead or a metal or steel, excuse me, I don't even know if lead's going to be attracted to this, but you attach it to a steel beam or something, it would take 1,000 pounds of pressure to remove the magnet from the steel. You'll never pull it off, right? So he had to be very careful with this magnet, because if he accidentally dropped it against his motorcycle or his car, he's not going to have enough power to get this thing off his car, ever. He'll have to use some mechanical device to get it off his vehicle. But he rigged up this, he has pet mice, and he rigged up a pole on a spindle, just with like a rod, and he put one mouse in one clear cup, like the kind of red cups you get at parties, but it was clear. And so the little mouse is cute, and then he's cleaned himself off, and there's another one on the other side, and they weigh the same, so it was weighing like a swing set, or like a seesaw. And he takes this 1,000-pound magnet, it's just beautiful polished steel, and he puts it against the mouse. And the mouse starts going backwards. And he explains to you the dielectric force that is creating that push against that mouse. It goes against the backside of the mouse, it goes the other way. Now, had he had an organized piece of steel in that cup, it would have sucked against that magnet, and if he'd had a finger in there, it would have been snipped off instantaneously. That's Aethereal Winds. It is everything that Faraday and Tesla told us about Aethereal Winds. The same thing that happens in an electrical circuit, an electromagnetic relationship between dielectric waves and magnetic waves, is happening on that creature. Why isn't the creature sucking against the magnet? Because the poles that are coming out of the magnet are unified, like a Van Allen belt. When they slam into the mouse, and again, this is a 1,000-pound magnet, so it's a seriously high velocity belt that's going around this magnet, okay? It can't grab on to the variable body cells of this mouse. The mouse is chaotically organized into an organic object. And so all it can do is go in there and bounce off, creating the force against the mouse, which is pushing him back. But if you put an organized crystallized steel in there, all bets are off. It's going to go into that organized steel and find a perfect pathway through that steel, and it's going to suck it like a vacuum directly at the magnet. Why does the magnet have a pole? Because of Aethereal Winds. Why does the Earth have a Van Allen belt? Because of Aethereal Winds. How does the magnet exist in the first place? Well, it's got some magnetized materials that it's built out of. I forgot what this particular one was made out of. It was gorgeous. But it's been loaded up like a crystalline structure inside. Very unified in the way that its little tiny poles, okay, are all combined to augment themselves. It starts to amplify. Imagine I come up behind you like a big asshole and I push you into the pool. I can push you maybe 6 feet into the pool. Then you get out and kick my ass. But what if I pushed your left side and someone exactly my size pushed you on the right side? And we pushed you at the same time with 2 hands on your left and 2 hands on your right. So you have 4 times or 2 times the power pushing you. You may not go exactly 12 feet, but you're probably going to go 9 feet, 1.5, because you have more force on you. This amplification is what's the basis of the Tesla coil. It's the basis of coils. If you had half an amp going into a coil and it goes 1 rotation around, it's now 1 amp. 1 more rotation around, it's 2 amps. And it just keeps going up and up and up. That's why the Tesla coil is so powerful. Tesla invented the Tesla coil for one reason that has been completely lost, at least in all of the examples that I see online, which is to go from the bottom of the Tesla coil to the top and then zap electricity off the top using that big chrome kind of elliptical sphere up there. And you create some target that's either negative or positively charged, depending on how you run the Tesla coil, and then wham, there goes a piece of electricity, a lightning bolt. When I was at the Boston Science Museum as a young man, probably 11 years old, I went and saw 1,000,000 volts. The guy's inside of a Faraday cage. Okay, he puts his arms on the inside of the cage. Here comes 1,000,000 volts from the Tesla coil over to the cage, and based on a Faraday cage, which is a very specific thing. I need you guys to understand Faraday cages, okay? If electricity is alternating and varying in its voltage or its amperage, it won't work. It'll go through the cage and shock the shit out of you. If you make it a fixed frequency, like a direct current, it's at this frequency. Boom, it hits the cage, and because of the Faraday cage, and it's sort of it's a water tension model using a grid, which is the cage. It'll only be able to spread out around the outside. But if it's a variable circuit, it can crawl inside the cage. When you get hit by a lightning bolt, if you had a Faraday cage, which is your car, it'll stay on the outside because the lightning bolt's made of one gigantic charge. Boom. But if that thing stayed on and started changing its frequency like a Borg does, right? Or the lasers that shoot Borgs, it'd go right inside your car and fire you to death. So for those of you who are preppers and survivalists and you're trying to build Faraday cages inside your house, you need to look at what source of signal you're trying to reflect off of that cage. It's got to be a unified frequency. At least that's how that explained to me. You won't catch me putting my arms on the inside of a cage and shocking it. But Tesla's whole invention was twofold. He did 2 experiments all the time. When he was in Colorado Springs, what he did was he built 1 Tesla coil to bring an infinitesimal amount of electricity out of the ether, using that elliptical sphere at the top to grab ethereal particles which once it collides with that sphere, that metal conductive sphere up there, it creates a little bit of ambient electricity, a bit like a solar panel. Then he brings it down the coil system and amps it up. Then he shoved a big spike into the ground. As he described it, he lured out of the earth, I assume he did this on an aqua ravine because he built his antenna on an aqua ravine starting in 1917. He takes a little bit, and then he said he siphoned out of the bowels of the earth, which is a plasma sphere, meaning the most fundamental, powerful ethereal cloud you could possibly construct is a plasma particle. It can be anything when it slows down, which is cool. He ran it over to another Tesla coil that then took that high amp source and even made it higher. And so his big Colorado Springs experiment was he was sitting there. It's a famous photograph of him sitting in that barrel-shaped building with this cage in the center. And he's reading a book, and he's completely surrounded by electricity. And the way that that has been documented by him and his assistant was that the lightning bolt stood for 1 minute. 60 seconds this thing was just blasting and breaking the sound barrier. I don't know how that guy didn't go deaf, honestly, during that experiment. But the assistant has to break the circuit, thus breaking the siphon. It's over. He packs his bags and leaves Colorado Springs. And he starts building the 1917 Tesla tower. What was that thing? It was a big tower. It's a big, gigantic Tesla coil, the size of like a water tower. At the top is the big conductive sphere. It's going to grab a much bigger supply of electricity out of the ether and drive it down to a system that would amplify the shit out of it. And then once he mastered that, he was going to start broadcasting it to households, which would then grab this lower frequency, agitate it back up to a higher frequency, and we'd all have electricity. And you never have a wire anywhere in the world. You never have to have a battery in anything. You just have to be in the line of shot of this electricity. Now, obviously, nothing's that simple, because we know that, unless you can pipe it in every direction all the time, as soon as you flew on your plane, your phone would shut off because it had any power. So we might add batteries just to do it. But in terms of charging and equipment, could be that a city is constantly peppered with this stuff, and so as long as you got your electric car inside New York City, it would just run. You park it, it's constantly charging, or it doesn't have to charge. Doesn't matter. But maybe you have to go in the country where they don't have full proliferation of this technology, and your battery starts taking over for a little while. Get to your destination, he's beaming it over there, boom, you start charging back up again. You're okay. No one ever accused Tesla of building things that didn't work. It's probably the thing he's most famous for. He built things in his brain for years until they worked perfectly. Then he built them in real life. Okay. Well, he believed in ether. In fact, he was the master of ether. He just called it electricity. Pretty cool. But let me hit you up with one little caveat before we end the episode. We're always talking about dreams, right, on this show. I'm getting really close to doing another dream episode. But what happens when we go to bed? Fall asleep. Okay, there's a bunch of people who don't have dreams. I'm not sure why that's the case. I don't know. What happens when you fall asleep? Now, some people don't dream. At least they don't remember them when they wake up. And I, for the life of me, cannot figure that out. I dream, like I've said several times, and my dreams are getting more intense and more intense. It's almost as if by doing dream research, and I don't write anything down when I wake up in the morning. I probably should, but I tell my friends about my dreams a lot, so that helps me remember them forever. But they are sagas. They go on forever. And I'll recycle a dream. I had one the other day I recycled that I was in the dream and I was like, oh my God, I haven't had this dream in a really long time. But I knew the dream. I knew where I was. I knew what I needed to do. And I did an adult version of the dream where I was like, all right, I'm not playing this bullshit anymore. I was being chased. It was like a girlfriend and I were in like a mansion on a hill. And we were being kind of held captive. It was kind of a modern, like a modern home, but it was built kind of like a castle. Like some guy had some fetish. And so we escaped, and we found out we were on a hill, and so now we're down inside this kind of streamy, weird woods. We're being chased. They don't know where we are. We don't know where they are, but we're kind of sure that this is away from the place. It was just an old dream. But like I said in one of my recent episodes, I said, look, how is it that you're able to imagine physics perfect in a dream? Because you are, right? You cast light in your brain better than any video game engine that's ever been written. Well, a housewife or some young kid could see it like they were a master physicist, like they were a master game programmer. How's that possible, right? Well, if ether exists and it penetrates all things because it makes all things, right? And we're saying that gravity exists because ethereal wind is bounced off of objects that are so dense that ether fights ether and it creates this push on you. And for those of you who think it's air pressure, it's not air pressure. When you vacuum a chamber with a feather in it, if air pressure was gravity, then the feather would float directly in the center of the box. That is a very old hypothesis that they proved false way before they had any theory of it being anything else. But if we go up to the carrier wave of consciousness that rides on top of this stuff, right? The life force that's out there. Well, just because you're asleep doesn't mean reality stops. It just means you're really not participating in this 5-sense system. When you're in your dreams, you do not have 5 senses. You don't. Now, why we have to dream, it's never been explained. Dark City is probably the biggest clue to why we have to sleep. Here we are built out of receptive antenna, nucleic acid chains called DNA. They're shaped exactly like antennas. So it would seem as if when we go to sleep, we're being programmed. It's time for a software upgrade. It's time for a memory backup, right? For any of you back up your computers to cloud software or external hard drives, well, it takes a little while to do that, right? It's best if you don't use your computer. You ever run a diagnosis on your hard drive while using your computer? The warning comes up and goes, okay, we're going to start using the shit out of your hard drive, so things are going to be really slow if you do anything on your computer that requires hard drive reading and writing, because we're using it. It's beautiful how computers have upgraded our thinking about ourselves, if you really pay attention. The time that I woke up to a gray alien telling me what's in my Christmas present, and he was right, I was sleeping in a twin bed with my girlfriend. We hadn't bought our queen-size bed yet. We just moved in together. But my back was to her back, and our brains were probably no more than 2 feet away from each other all night. If I spooned her or she spooned me, then, man, her brain's 6 inches, 2 inches, maybe even touching. And that's that other experiment where you're sharing your consciousness. So I'm having a dream about aliens because I'm reading the book Communion, written by Whitley Strieber. And she is excited about the fact she bought me origami paper. She's saying to herself at night, he'll never think of this. So it goes into a fictional scenario of an alien. I dream the whole thing. I've already got the clue from her because of this carrier wave. And I wake up and I've got this scenario thinking I met an alien. Doesn't explain Walt Disney, but it definitely explains that alien. We seem to create the realities that we have, right? Law of attraction. People who are pessimistic live shitty lives. They do. Everything that they fear especially happens. Those of us who live very positive lives and say, you know what, I'm not saying the universe is my bitch, but there's a relationship there. You project out what you want. You're willing to put whatever into it that you need to get it done. And it seems to happen. It's pretty amazing. Try it. Might take you some practice for a little while, right? And I want to leave this with you, and I might create an entire episode about this, but there's a little precursor to my thinking. This is not exactly at all related to this episode, so there's a little bonus at the end here. Now, for those of you who've never played World of Warcraft, or a game with downloadable content, this will go over your head a little bit, but I'll try to make it easy to understand. It's not going to go over your head because you're not smart. It's just going to go over your head because you maybe haven't experienced this before. But I would say even movie sequels are another way of thinking about this, which nearly all of you have experienced, right? Blizzard Entertainment is a huge game company down the street in Irvine, California. They create a game called World of Warcraft. It has a continent. When it was first launched, it had 2 continents, tons of cities, tons of dungeons and experiences and quests and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it took them about $140 million to make the first version of the game that released in 2004. Within a year, the hardcore players had experienced everything. They were at level 60, the highest level you could go. They had played every dungeon a dozen times, if not 100 times. They had every piece of gear you could possibly have. And so they just sat in limbo. Every time they logged in, they just did the same thing over and over again. Grind and grind and grind. And they got bored of life in that game until Burning Crusades came out, the next expansion, which created, I think it's called Badlands, right? And then they had a new world to experience, and they ate that thing alive. Some people hit maximum level within 24 hours. Some guy, I think, did 8 hours because he was so buffed up from the previous game. He had everything, so he was just mowing through everything really fast. And he had to wait for his friends to join him so he could do the dungeons and stuff, but there might be something to the universe. One of the reasons why we don't understand everything, and the reason why characters in a book will never be able to conceive of the writer that wrote them, is simply because we might exhaust all that has been created for us to experience. And you don't want to be waiting around in this world for the expansion pack. For those of you that write, when I was having the conversation with my new friend Steve, we got to the point in the conversation where we're talking about how characters write themselves sometimes. If you've ever written a story for a prolonged period of time, say a month to 6 months to 2 years or whatever, there'll come a point when the characters start to live on their own, inside your mind or somewhere else. Just like dream characters in a dream. If you try to explain this to yourself in a rational way, you won't be able to do it easily. You'll start to feel maybe you're a little nuts to think that these characters live on their own. There's a great Twilight Zone, I think the last one in season 1, that has a guy that talks into a dictaphone, and whatever he says becomes real in the real world. It's a beautiful, beautiful idea. That was one of the best endings ever. It's the only one I know that Rod Serling is at the beginning of the episode and at the end of the episode, and he's a character in a Twilight Zone. It's the only one. But remember that pinball thing? We know that in a pinball game, it's governed by gravity. The ball is pushed down to the table, and then it is further pushed down by bumpers and flippers and kickers and all kinds of stuff. If you tilt the machine, you can mess with it. We have no question as to whether or not the pinball exists. Some pinball games eventually introduced additional balls. You could have 2 balls. Sometimes you had like 4 or 5 of them going at the same time. By the way, the trick to beating that is to stare in the center of the pinball machine's field. Don't stare at the flippers. Don't stare at any of the balls. Stare in the center of the field. And your peripheral vision, which has faster frame rates than your forward-looking vision, will inform you where all these balls are, and you'll be able to do all kinds of crazy shit with 4 balls at once. A little trick for you from a pinball dude. But what if a pinball, having its own consciousness, was not governed by gravity because it's not really in this world? But it can come down and it can influence the ball that you are playing with, the one that you do acknowledge that exists. And your ball starts doing weird stuff. It's bouncing off something that's not on the field. What's going on? If you write a story, you open your mind up to see things that you haven't seen before. You're seeing things in your mind. It's a daydream. It's a daydream. What if these characters that you're writing are merely being solicited out of the universe to play a character in a story? They actually have their own consciousness. Now, as an actor, if you've ever been one before, you will go on stage and say you do Shakespeare. Well, you don't walk up to the director, unless you're doing a real modern interpretation, and question whether or not Romeo and Juliet die at the end. If you negate that storyline, you have injured the entire power of the script. Okay. Let's say you're making Star Wars 55, and you're Mark Hamill at the age of 190,000, and, he reads the script. He's been doing this a long time, and he's done all kinds of other cartoon voiceovers. He's seen stories. He's like, I know what a good story is. And someone wrote a crappy scene for him, a crappy line for him, and he's like, you know what? How old are you? Oh, you're 24. How the hell did you get this job? Oh, your uncle owns the studio. Got it. All right. Let me get you hip to something here. This line where I say, no, that's very cliche and stupid. He may say this a lot better than I'm saying it right now, a lot more friendly. He goes, here's what we're going to do. Han Solo's not going to get stabbed on some stupid walkway and die by his son. It's Han Solo, man. He's a badass. He's our ultimate hero. His death has to be unbelievable. Now, his son can kill him. That's a great little turn there, right? Very predictable, but whatever. But we're not going to just do this stupid skewer with a lightsaber through his chest. We're going to make this epic, and here's how we're going to do it. Boom, 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 boom. He describes it. Why? Because he's got wisdom. He's been around. He can mess with the script. And the writer, if they're intelligent, will go, damn. And I get the writing credit for your idea? Sure do, man. I'm already an actor with my own credit. It's cool. I just want to act a good line. I want to see this. Perhaps I try to stop the sun and Han still gets it. Okay, made it better. What I'm starting to think is that the players in the scripts in our mind, they're willing to go along with the script up to a point, and then sometimes they educate you considerably. So perhaps the act of writing is way more powerful than anyone understands because they don't understand the universe. They don't understand the possibilities that come into play when you take the whole universe and you make it out of ethereal winds, but you raise consciousness up to the pinball level of its own unique life energy, its own identity, its own memory banks, wherever that is stored. You know, when we have memory in a computer, it's a chip in your computer, right? That's called memory. And don't get confused with hard disk, but it's the same sort of principle. That's storage. But what's memory? Memory is this thing that gets created in some dark factory by robots all over the world and gets shipped to us, and we put it in our machines, and then it holds our memories, the stuff that we create, our paintings, our drawings, our files. Okay, let's do this. The chip is ethereal winds. The electrical charges, the positives and negatives, which make up the zeros and ones that make up digital data, that's the consciousness that rides on top of the ethereal wind, which is the chip. Think about it. A non-player character in a video game, meaning one that's been programmed to talk to you, it's not really a human being somewhere in a laboratory talking back to you. It lives. Right now, as I'm sitting here talking to you, there are probably over 20,000, I don't even know the number, non-player characters in memory in over, I don't know, 50, 75, 100 servers that World of Warcraft, made by Blizzard Entertainment, has paid for on some computer. It's living. It lives a very tiny life. It gives out perhaps food so you can go repair yourself. It sends you on a quest that makes you, the real living being, go out and do something for real inside memory. It's alive. Maybe in our world there are no automated characters that are like God's got some guy working at a convenience store. He's not real. But we go in there and we buy stuff from him. We're like, God, how could a guy work at this place? Oh, he's a non-player character. Nope, he's a real human being. He's got a passion, and that's his store. It's his sovereign world. And you interact with it every once in a while. So for those of you who feel me, hopefully you've had a little bit of your frustrum of view and consciousness expanded just a little bit. If you're interested in science and you want to get into this, my recommendation is this. If you're questioning this, then go look up all the skeptics about the Michelson experiment, and you'll recapture ether in a very deep-rooted way. But if you just want to move straight in, go study ether. Study the ones that believed in it. Study the ones that found it, measured its speed in the universe, and start from there. Why get into the cynicism of its existence when the people that were the smartest, that created the patents that we use to have this show exist right now, right? Einstein had nothing to do with what you're experiencing on a daily basis. And I mean nothing. Okay? So for being the smartest guy that ever lived, okay? He contributed nothing. Tesla had hundreds and hundreds of patents that we use every single day, based on the shoulders of the giants that lived before him. All the scientists, Volta, all the way back to Faraday, and all the people he stood on the shoulders of. We're uncovering the truth slowly. But if we don't pay attention to those who actually contributed to our reality and those that have been theorizing bullshit around our reality to confuse us, then we're losing. Let's be the ones that focus on reality, right? If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. There's video and audio. There's a locked Facebook group. There's a Patreon page for those who want to contribute. If you haven't liked and subscribed, do that. Again, there's the little bell. I keep forgetting to tell people. The bells get shut off, which is really strange. So you will click the bell and it will unclick itself. It's something that just happens to happen, in social media from time to time to keep you from useful information. If the bell unclicking is actually occurring, I don't use the bell that much because I visit my subscription feed quite a bit, then I think we can be flattered, right? That we have good information that is being unbelled. If any of our stuff is being censored, then good. That means that we're on the right track. That's a success. Again, when you only get the flack if you're over the target, right? Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.